Welcome to Divisionalysis, I'm Fog. Welcome back. We're still on the trail for the highest damage weapon talent. Today it's all about the weapon damage talents. Let's go. So we're back with our test build, the generic brand sets with Gunner as the specialization, Gunner providing its usual. Today it's all about this box, the weapon damage box. Now the split between all weapon damage and assault rifle damage doesn't matter because it's all the same box, so 140% weapon damage is what we're adding to with today's talents. Same crit chance, crit damage as we've been using and running with, and it won't have much effect, but we're firing roughly 65% of the time and reloading for 35% of the time. Let's get cracking. Our damage control build at 140% weapon damage and at 59% crit chance and 153% crit hit damage, it puts out 90.27 crit damage. Adding to the build, and that gives us a total of 456.65% over base. So that's our control, that's our start point with these talents. Just a reminder that you can in fact reverse these, or it doesn't matter what order you do them in, and today we're going to look at them in this order so that weapon damage is front and center, but the same total remains, 456%. Let's have a look at today's talents. In sync, giving us 15% skill damage and 15% weapon damage. That's what we're concerned with. And the damage is increased by a factor of 2 when both buffs are active. It's going to be interesting. Optimist, considered by a lot of people as being one of the best damage talents. Weapon damage is increased by 3% for every 10% of your ammo that's missing from the magazine, and close and personal, 30% weapon damage if we're killing a target within 7 meters. So each one of these has the ability to provide us with an additional 30% weapon damage at full power or when procced. Is that really going to be the case though? There's the if and the then, but the then for these weapons is 30% added weapon damage, and we're adding that at 140% base. So that means the diminished returns at 140% base, we're down to 41.66% of effectiveness for that 30%, and even without doing the calculations, just from diminished returns, I can tell you that 12.5% is their top return amount. But let's do that anyway. 90.27 crit damage, 140% weapon damage as our base, gives us 456. But when we add our talents in at their full power, that goes to 170% weapon damage. And that gives us a 513% over base return, giving us an actual return for these talents at full power of 12.5%. With weapon damage talents, it is important because we're adding into the same box. We've built up that 140% with 6 red cores on top of our assault rifle damage, our specialization damage, and also our watch as well, which is also adding in there as well. But if we choose not to take those red cores, that's 90% weapon damage, reducing it down to 50% weapon damage. So our diminished returns, because we're adding to a less full bucket, we're actually able to get a 20% return to a blue build from these talents. Now that doesn't mean that you're going to be putting out more damage, because you're starting at a much lower base. Your return on your build, which starts at 285%, as opposed to 456% on an all-red build, but the return is better. 342% over our 285% start state means that we're getting a 20% return, but that 342% output is only 66% the output of our all-red build. So although you're getting more from it, you're not doing more damage than a 6 red build. But what that means is that we've removed 6 red cores from our build, a full 90% weapon damage, but we're only doing 33% less damage output. Just food for thought. But right now we are looking for the highest damage output on our 6 red build. We're going to start with in sync. So hitting an enemy grants 15% skill damage. Not concerned with that today. Today we are concerned with using a non-shield skill or damaging an enemy with a skill grants 15% weapon damage for 5 seconds. Now, although it says using a non-shield skill, what it should really say is deploying a non-shield skill, because here with the defender drone or even the healing hive, I'm still using the skill, but I'm not getting the proc that I require. And that proc, if I'm going to access all of the 12.5% damage that InSync is offering, I need to be damaging an enemy in order to get that double dose of that buff. So let's test which skill is going to be the best for uptime whilst damaging an NPC. An important component to uptime is going to be the cooldowns. I'm just going to disable that in range. And here we have the buff applied by the weapon, so you can see the white cog on top. And I'm going to use the oxidizer here to proc the turret, where you can see the white cog on the bottom. When both of those are active at the same time, we're doubling both of those buffs of 15% up to 30%. As you can see with the oxidizer, it actually lasts for a fair amount of time. The cloud duration, 6 seconds, and whilst it's doing damage, it's still proccing that skill. But on a 6 red build, you're limited to 2 ammo and the duration of your status effect, with the oxidizer being the longest of the two. So oxidizer out of the chems. We've also got the hive, which is also capable of delivering a status effect. And as you can see here, it releases the drones and then it will continue to proc whilst the bleed is active. The advantage of the hive though is that it refills every 9 seconds, at least with the mods that I've got on this 6 red build, which means that I can redeploy with my single amount of stims, and the bleed will last almost as long as what it takes me to regen. So a surprise packet as far as being able to maintain uptime for InSync. We also have the heal hive. Although it doesn't do damage, I do have the capacity to be able to deploy, get the buff, pick it up, redeploy, get the buff. I mean, incredibly painful, but it is possible to be able to maintain the buff using that method. We've also got fireflies, which are pretty pointless as far as generating an InSync buff is concerned. I get the buff up once I deploy, but then the buff has actually gone down even before the skill has actually done any damage, and then the damage only lasts for the duration of that 5 seconds before it cools off again. We've got Seeker Mines, and there are a couple that actually create a status effect. The Explosive Seeker will generate bleed for 7 seconds, and the Fire Burst, I get to deploy it, but even before I actually reach a target, that buff on instinct is going to degrade, and then I'm left with just the burn duration, which is 4 seconds. Mortar turrets, I don't even have the sniper turret enacted on this character. Obviously not an enduring amount of damage. The mortar turret does have the bleed factor though, but for enduring we have the ability to burn, and that will continue for as long as the duration of the turret is up. Now on a 6 red build, a fire turret, 18 seconds I think is its duration. Then you've got the fire status effect on top of that, which is going to extend that duration. Might be something to look at when the new gear set comes out. Everyone's calling FireQuest 2.0. So let's stop mucking around. Let's go to skills that actually have a long duration and a relatively short cooldown. To the Striker Drone. Duration of 230 seconds on this 6 red build. 22 seconds of cooldown time. Generally is going to be up in between waves, so a very strong candidate, if not the best. Even on a 6 red build, I have the ability to increase its damage and also its health, because if that Striker Drone is targeted, or the enemies have the capacity to do, it will go down and I no longer have access to that buff. I'm also able to increase the damage with expertise. And also the assault turret, very same category as the assault drone, 216 seconds duration in this case. I've opted for a skill haste mod on my 6 red build, which brings the cooldown down to 21.2 seconds, but I'm also able to pick it up prior to that as well, so less cooldown than what the striker drone does, and a greater amount of health by a considerable margin as well. I'm also able to increase its damage with expertise. Let's see what the uptime is like for both of these skill sets. Now already you can see, although the damage isn't 100% consistent, the drop between whatever its magazine size is, I suppose, is less than what the cooldown of the talent is. So we're effectively achieving 100% uptime for the turret. Let's check out the drone. There you go, pick up my turret. I've only got a 7-second cooldown. But let's deploy the drone, and buff's already started, and then once again the magazine size of the drone and its reloading time is less than what the cooldown of InSync is, and so therefore again with the striker we've also got practically 100% uptime from either of these skills, provided that they aren't destroyed. You do, however, need to be careful if either your turret or your drone has targeted something that isn't accessible to its damage. You're now losing 100% of your buff for your weapon. So it does take a little bit of vigilance in that regard. So easy, point and shoot. Just make sure that your skills are doing damage. So it is very reliant. It's a short uptime if you don't have the correct skill selection, but it does reproc. So continued damage means that you can have continued uptime. What that means is that you've got interdependent value and it's assigned to your skill and your skill selection. So the uptime of that skill, its cooldown, and then in some cases the health of that skill as well. Because of those reasons, you are restricted to the skills that you can select in order to maximize the benefit that you get from InSync. And that leads to, most often, a hybridization of your build. Good or bad, we'll have to wait to find out. Because this skill also gives you increased skill damage, and that will definitely add to your overall damage output. Another thing that we'll be looking at in the future. But even on a 6 red build, we're actually able to gain a very high uptime and only assigning one of our skill slots. Obviously we're going to guarantee a maximum uptime by assigning 2, but even with just one, we're able to get a very high uptime on InSync. You do have to concentrate a little bit on making sure that your skill is targeting an enemy at all times, and if you've only got one of those skills, that becomes more of an issue. But even on a red build, it is possible to achieve something around 95% uptime to this talent. There is potentially less value in Legendary because those skills can get targeted and the enemies are quite prone to do so, and if they do get destroyed on a 6 red build, that cooldown time is 20 plus seconds, which means a long period of time without that buff at all. And speedrunners, the skill selection, obviously the time to deploy it is a consideration. The turret takes a little bit longer to deploy than what the striker drone does, but the turret comes with a health aspect which is going to be an advantage. Tough choice there. But with 95% uptime and with only one skill slot assigned to it, at maximum value being 12.5%, we're able to achieve, in most cases, about 11.5% added damage to your build with InSync. But if we're talking about hybridization, we can't ignore another weapon damage talent, the Capacitor. Capacitance what we're concerned about is the weapon damage portion. We'll look at the skill damage portion a little later on, but for right now, for each skill tier that you've got, you are going to gain 7.5% weapon damage. Now, as we're looking for the ultimate damage meta, we're going to be having 6 reds, not really useful, but for a skill build, this can add quite an amount of damage. And if we're talking about skill builds and hybridization, we have to do a face-off between the capacitor and the test subject. So for the capacitor, on a skill build, our base level weapon damage starts at 50% because we're all skill tiers, no reds, giving us a base level of 285% in our weapon damage category, or overall damage output, I should say, from our weapon. And the capacitor, with its ability to add 7.5% per skill tier, that's going to ramp that up to 95% weapon damage, and our overall damage output from our weapon alone ramps up to 371%, and that is a 30% increase on our damage output from our weapon due to capacitance. What about the test subject? And perfectly in sync. We start at the same base level with all skill tiers, and then perfectly in sync grants us 40% when it is active, and that takes us up to 361% output, which means if we include our uptime, 25% is probably where we're going to average as far as our weapon damage output is concerned, and the addition that perfectly in sync makes. So not quite as much as capacitance, but if we look at an all red build, capacitance 0% addition, whereas the test subject, not reliant on skill tiers, now we still get that 40% added weapon damage, and perfectly in sync on an all red build has the capacity to deliver up to 15% added damage to an all red build. That is a whopping amount of damage to add to an all red build, and we'll weigh that up at the end. There's more to compare though. Optimist. Now, some people consider this to be an excellent damage talent to have on your weapon. Let's break this down. Weapon damage is increased by 3% for every 10% ammo missing from the magazine. And it seems like this should be very easy to work out. At maximum stacks, Optimist is going to give us a full 12.5% damage. But how often are we at full stacks? Well, it's only at the end of the magazine, and if things were easy, it would look like this, where for every 10% that's missing from the magazine, we should see a 3% increase to our weapon damage. Oh, but no. The developers can't have it that easy. How Optimist actually works is they've broken it down per bullet. So as you can see here in this demonstration, per bullet I'm getting an increase on my damage every single time. And you would think that I would be able to break that 30% down into 0.6% per bullet, and I would get a consistent rise in my damage all the way up to 30% at the end of the magazine. Oh, no. The developers can't have it that easy. Instead, it looks like this. It's a wonky line. And the way that this actually works, for some ungodly reason, is that you will get 0.5% weapon damage added per bullet for 40 of your bullets, which adds 20% weapon damage. And then at these points here, 3, 8, 13, 18, so every 5 bullets from the third bullet, you will get a full 1% for that bullet added and to your weapon damage for 10 of those bullets out of the magazine, which is where the other 10% comes from, totaling 30%. Thanks, developers. For multi-target damage or enduring damage, where we're using the majority of our magazine, if not all of it, The average added weapon damage achieved sits around about here. When we're doing single target damage, so we're only taking down one enemy and then we're reloading, we're using this portion of our magazine only, which means that the average that we get from single target damage is down around this point. And so for multi-target or enduring damage, what happens is you're getting 15.3% average weapon damage added. We're doing multi-target or enduring damage around about 35% of the time. That's on a full red build, based on the research that I've done so far. An average of around about 35% of the time it's multi-target, or 35% of the time we're using the majority, if not all, of our magazine, which gives us 5.35 weapon damage added when we're doing that. And when we're doing single target or burst damage, we're getting 9.3% added, and we're doing that 65% of the time for an additional 6.05% weapon damage. So overall, 11.4% weapon damage is added by Optimist. And when we factor that in over our base of 456.65, the additional 11.4% weapon damage means that Optimist is only adding, on average, 4.75% to our build. What about Perfect Optimist and the Shield Splinterer? Let's have a quick look at that. And again, once again, the developers can't make it easy. It's not even a direct increase on our wonky line from before. It's completely different again. This time we're getting 0.5% per bullet for 20 of our bullets, giving us 10% weapon damage. And then we're getting 1% per bullet for 30 of our bullets. And that will give us an additional 30%, totaling the 40% on offer from the Shield Splinterer and Perfect Optimist. For multi-target, we're using all that magazine, meaning our average sits around about the 20% mark. And then for single target, our average benefit comes down to around about 12.5%. So 20.4% for full magazine use, done 35% of the time, adds 7.14, and single target, an additional 8.06. So for the Perfect Optimist, we are averaging 15.2% weapon damage added to our build. And when we plug that in, Perfect Optimist will grant you around about 6.33% added to your build. Oh, I thought that one was going to be simple. Optimist, ease. Just literally pull the trigger, you're emptying the magazine anyway. You will get more value from lower weapon damage builds because of diminished returns. Not going to be outputting more damage, but you will get more damage from it. There's more value for faster firing weapons that have a lower base bullet damage, and that's purely because although they're delivering the same amount of damage, if not in some cases more damage per second, it takes them more bullets to kill an enemy. Therefore, they're getting more value from Optimist because, on average, more of their magazine doing single target damage is emptied. And for the same reason, there's potentially more value in more difficult content because you are, on average, going to be using more of your magazine in order to take down those enemies. One of the qualitative benefits of Optimist is that the highest amount of damage is at the end of the magazine, which, when it comes to taking down a target, is generally where you need it in the hope that you're not going to have to reload as part of taking down that enemy, where your damage drops off considerably, and it also represents a high danger period for you. But that's Optimist. No thought required. Close and Personal is the next talent we're going to be looking at. 30%, as long as you're within 7 meters, and it is an on-kill mechanic, and you've got 10 seconds within which to reproc it. 170% weapon damage gives us our 12.5% added to our build when it is active. Perfectly close and personal. So our Savage Wolverine, we may as well analyze this at the same time. the odd characteristic of giving you 38% weapon damage rather than 40. I don't know why they went with 38, but they did. Which means our 140 goes up to 178. And that means that perfectly close and personal has the capability of delivering 15.8% added damage to your build when it is active. Now, I explained the on-kill mechanic in the last video with Killer. It suffers the same, well, close and personal suffers from the same disadvantage, which is that you'll never have it active for the very first target. So if we're facing an average of 6 enemies, we're going to end up with an 83.33% value from close and personal. But just like Killer, close and personal suffers from the time factor as well. You've got to reproc close and personal within 10 seconds, otherwise there is a break. And if there is a break, it significantly affects the value that you get from close and personal. And even with one break in 6 targets, you are now reduced down to 66% of the value for the talent. So as far as ease goes, it is on kill, it is proximity based, being 7 meters from a target, also timed to time out after 10 seconds, but it does have the ability to reproc. So you're never going to have it available on the first target, and in the case of proximity, sometimes there are targets that are impossible for you to be able to proc that talent. So there is an added layer of difficulty there. But once you have it procced, even if that target lies outside of the proximity, you'll still have it active. You just need to get to the next target before the 10 seconds run out and kill it as well. But the difficulty with close and personal lies heavily in the proximity to a target. My initial research suggests that for every 10 meters that you close the distance to NPCs, you're roughly increasing their effectiveness at outputting damage or putting damage onto you by about 50%. So being within 7 meters, you are in the highest threat environment that you possibly can. And in most cases, being in close proximity is going to force you to adjust both your playstyle and also your build in order to mitigate that damage or that increased damage that's coming your way. And in order to proc the talent, you often will not have the option to prioritize targets in the order that you normally would prefer to. So there is layers of difficulty. But here in this example, I took into a mission a build that I specifically designed in order to maximize my ability to be at close proximity. And if I did that, I was able to have an uptime for close and personal that was around about 75% of all targets engaged. So including the reduction of that first target, taking me down to 83%, it only dropped me a little bit further. My ability to engage targets was only slightly inhibited, and it took me down to 75% uptime. So with a 75% return on close and personal, we're looking at around about 7 to 9% for normal close and personal, and around about 10 to 12% for perfectly close and personal added to your build. And that brings me to the summary and the story of where we're at so far. We looked at the unique multipliers of the status effect talents, 0 to 30% for Thunderstrike, and if St. Elmo's is in the group, potentially a massive amount of damage. 4 to 20% for our Eyeless, Ignited and Sadist. For Flatline, this one is fairly unique amongst this bunch. If we want the 100% uptime, it requires the Technician specialization, and that drops our damage from Gunner, meaning that we get an average of 4.27% if we're taking that option for 100% uptime. Now, what I didn't include in the last version was the Kingbreaker with perfect flat 9. Get to see that for the first time. And Kingbreaker, because we're adding just purely 5% more amplified damage, all of the diminished returns that we've received from the lack of Gunner and Technician have already taken effect. It's literally just the diminished returns of our additional 5% on top of what is just 15%. So a very empty bucket, which means that the Kingbreaker can actually achieve between 8.8% all the way up to its maximum of 20%. But achieving the maximums of 15 and 20% is very much tied to the assignment of a skill, if we want to keep Gunner, that is. And that is a non-damage skill. But it is possible to get up to 100% uptime with a skill assigned to it, and a slight gear change. It doesn't necessarily have to be from 6 reds, but a slight gear change is necessary. Ranger, super easy, 6 to 8% in heroic, and we're probably looking at 9 to 13% for legendary. Strained, 6 to 8% if we're taking as much advantage of it as we possibly can, but that is very hard to do. But for our tank builds that are firing majority of their magazine most of the time, potentially 8 to 11% return there. Killer, which up until this point was the highest returning value talent, between 7 and 9.5% return on damage, but speed is the key, and there is reduced value for any on-kill mechanic when it comes to group play. Vindictive, the only team talent so far, tied to skills and kills, but 5 to 9% per player can be added. Now the new entries, In Sync, the big surprise value talent as far as I'm concerned, 11 to 12% for normal In Sync on any weapon that isn't an exotic. And then if we take the test subject, we can get between 14 to 16% value, and that is on a red build as well. But it is skill uptime dependent, so you've got restricted options as far as your skills are concerned, but you can get a high uptime even from just one skill assigned. And if we're looking at a 6 skill tier build, you are looking at between 18 and 25% damage added to your weapon from taking on perfectly in sync. Big surprise. Probably the biggest letdown, I think, for most people is Optimist. 4 to 5% for normal Optimist, and 5 to 6.5% from the named Shield Splinterer. So there's more value if you have a lower value or a lower weapon damage build, more value from a lower bullet damage weapon, but there is literally no more room for improvement. You are stuck at the maximums that you can see there without a drastic change to how you play the game. Close and personal, 7 to 9%, falling right in the middle of the averages. For Savage Wolverine, 10 to 12%, but those come with the restrictions that you are going to be in a high threat, close proximity environment, and that will generally require you to adjust your build and your playstyle. But with a couple of reds taken off the build, less diminished returns from the talent itself, and on a run and gun build, possibly 12 to 18% being the average that you could add to that build type. Wow, we've covered a lot. There's still a few more that we need to go through as far as damage talents are concerned. I'll put out a mixed bag of talents in the next episode, and then we're probably going to have to look at skills after that. How much damage do skills add to even a 6 red build? Because we want the damage meta, and they are definitely going to add value, especially given what we discovered today. So if you liked it, like it. If you want to see more like this, then please subscribe, hit the notifications, but I will see you in the mixed bag episode next. Fog out.